no need for applause. I'm just going to very quickly ask two of my panelists that are here offside. Robert, Jana, I'm going to introduce you while you're sitting. We already agreed to sit under our names. Oh, and then we have Max. Hi, Max. I was hoping where you're going to be and where I can turn to for questions. We decided to try to be controversial. We decided to try not to speak about, well, kind of what is the status quo of the market. We decided to speak about solutions. And I wanted to start with a statement that Europeans are good savers, not to confuse with saviors, although they could be in the current geopolitical situations. There's 11 trillion euros in deposits, so no investment out of that. We, well, personally quite hope that Savings and Investment Union is not just another sexy name for CMU, but it really act as a tool or a set of tools to bring savings into investment. Well, we have good examples how to do and what solutions to introduce in order to have this shift happen. Sweden, UK, and globally Canada. We're going to speak about those solutions in a second. And we do have some food for thought also, and I'm happy to have Max offline. Because we have a new financials report actually introducing 10 particular changes that need to be done and need to be looked at in order to help Savings and Investment Union and make that transfer happen. I'm happy to introduce my panelists while they ask the questions, because I'm so keen to listen to what you have to say. Max, as you are here, head of research, New Financials, the lead author of the April 2025 report. If you could, out of those 10, which I'm happy to give you the mic to name, if you could pick 3, the most important ones, prioritize them, and perhaps be a little bit of a, how to say that, a solution giver to EU and the local policymakers. So Maximilian, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. Thank you, Anna, for your question, and I'm very sorry I can't be with you in the room today. Now, as you already mentioned, New Financial is a capital markets think tank, and we recently published this study that looks at successful and also less successful examples of savings and investment accounts in Europe and worldwide to inform the upcoming blueprint by the European Commission for a European savings and investment account. And these accounts have been very successful in some markets to encourage savers to become investors. And so if you ask me for our 3 recommendations, the 3 biggest or most important ones, is first of all, the main takeaway is that these accounts should be as simple as possible to encourage people to use them and to invest more of their money. We've seen in our research some very complicated accounts out there with, complex investment mandates, long minimum holding periods, complicated tax returns to fill out, and these accounts just aren't flying. Whereas the most successful accounts in our sample, you already mentioned them, including the ISK in Sweden, the TFSA in Canada, and the ISA in the UK, they basically say, look, here's a simple structure for you to hold your investments in. Here's a simple tax incentive. Here's how we've simplified tax reporting. And now go and invest in whatever you want. We know investing itself can already be quite complicated and challenging for people to understand. And if you then add a complex account structure on top of it, you probably won't convince people to use it. So that's the first recommendation. Second recommendation is to provide some form of an incentive to use these accounts. For example, a tax incentive. Free money can be a powerful driver to encourage people to do something. Now, I know this is controversial, and I know that governments in Europe already have very stretched government budgets and many obligations to meet. but I would say this tax incentive doesn't actually have to cost a lot. You could offer, instead of a tax-free account, you could offer, lower taxes. You could look at the Swedish model, which taxes holdings, not gains, but at a lower rate. You can also defer the payment of taxes while assets are still being held in the investment account to the point of when you actually withdraw your money. And you can also simplify tax reporting, which sort of brings us back to making these accounts as simple as possible. And my third recommendation, and I know we're not really talking about institutional money right now, but would be to look at the bigger picture when introducing these accounts. All countries with large pools of long-term capital in Europe, and indeed worldwide, have large funded pension systems. And that's why we at New Financial argue that a focus on retail investment is important, and these simple investment accounts can help to encourage people to invest more. But ultimately, you need both. You need more retail investment and larger structural reforms of pensions, away from those mainly unfunded pay-as-you-go pensions towards funded pensions that connect people with the capital markets, provide them with higher returns in the long run, stabilize European pension systems, and create a huge pool of capital that can support jobs, innovation, and economic growth in all corners of Europe.
Brilliant, thank you. I think a lot of that has already been said in the panel before, in terms of Polish savings and investment ecosystem. But I've already mentioned two savings accounts that are named as successful. One of them, I should know how to read that. I grew up in Norway, so investeringssparkonto and tax-free savings account in Canada. Jana Brodani, the Executive Director, Czech Capital Market Association. What are the actually features of those particular two examples of well-functioning investment accounts?
Thank you for the question. We are at the Investment Funds Conference, so we'll start with some numbers. Why should Sweden be inspiration to us? And 2 years ago, when we were in Sweden, having a meeting with our colleagues from Sweden, we were discussing, and they just mentioned very easily some numbers that I would say shocked us. The first number was that in Sweden, 90% of adult population has investments into investment funds. And we were like, 90% of adult population? And we thought that there's nothing that could surprise us more. And then they continued that it's 70% of kids under 18. And we're like, wow, how did you get to this situation? Long story short, in the end of 80s, they introduced some like small tax deduction. I think it was something like 100 euros a month. It was a tax deduction from the personal income tax. And this is, in the decades, how they reached these levels of investments. People started investing slowly. They shared the experience amongst others. It took a long time, but I think this is a good example how it could work. It's not an easy solution for the next year, but this is where we should start. So what the EU can't do or can do, how to be inspired by Sweden. So first of all, let me mention what EU can't do, because the real important things that come with investments actually start where the powers of EU institutions end. And I think it was already mentioned, taxation. I think there's no way that we would reach a single taxation of investments in Europe in the upcoming 5 or 10 years. Pension systems and some kind of promotion of investments or financial education. This is not that our citizens will start reading Politico or whatever the EU journal is and find out information about investments. This is usually purely on local level. But what the EU can do, actually, it's simplify the infrastructure. Let's have some positive and negative examples. The positive examples is definitely UCITS funds. It's globally recognized. It has gained a lot of trust in the previous decades, and this is an example how it could work, bringing the infrastructural features to the regulation of the financial market. Let's mention also some negative experience. It's so-called pan-European pension product. You can see that it did not attract a lot of interest from the side of financial institutions and from the side of investors. But on the other hand, I'm always saying that European Union comes with quite a good proposals, but it's only the second try. And the second try for us, it could be the LTIF, European Long-Term Investment Fund, which gains a lot of attraction these days, and it enables investments of, let's say, retail investors into private equity, infrastructure, and so on. So these are the good examples that can be done. Maybe mentioning one more, I don't know whether you have heard of the so-called 28 regime. It's enabling investing of institutional investors mostly into startups by launching EU-recognized label based on the contract law or corporate law for startups and some companies. So the long story short, from what was mentioned, is that what can be done is not something we may expect or ask from the European institution. It must be done on the local level by local politicians.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Maximilian in a second, just because I see you're nodding, because that was actually a question I wanted to ask you, whether the European aspirations are, well, led in a correct way, whether this the entire job isn't the local one to do. But Robert Hoerberg, the CEO, Allianz Poland, was one of the largest asset managers. What do you see as the main obstacle? And that will be the boring part. Sorry, Robert, to put that on your shoulders. Regulatory and tax as the bottlenecks holding this whole transition as being one of the top priorities of EU and local markets. What are the bottlenecks?
Yeah, so if we look at the previous panels and also the responses that we've heard so far, it's always the same 4 or 5 buzzwords and topics which come up, whether it's regulation, taxes, trust in the system, ease of use, education. And we always move around those topics. If we want to move savings on the bank account into more productive use in the capital markets, in my opinion, these are local levers that we need to use. Changes in the regulation, make tax incentives. This is, in my opinion, something that we need to do locally and not wait for Brussels. The situation right now, a typical average Polish person, like we've seen in the video, have some savings, is not familiar with investment funds, so topic education, doesn't want to deal with filling out the forms, and so the famous Polish ankieta, doesn't want to be bothered and hassled by making transfers and following the investment accounts. Then later, how is this taxed? So ease of use, the person says, you know what, I'll just leave the money on the bank account. So what we need to do is make investing more attractive. I mean, in the long run, it's a matter of education, but in the short run, you can have a quick gain by steering the incentive by taxes. As an example, reduce taxes for investments in the capital market, or even increase taxes on interest income from a bank deposit. In that way, you could still have a balanced budget, but still try to favor capital market investments. This is, in my opinion, the quick win. In the long run, it's education and to some extent regulation. So regulation is not a business enabler, but if it's done not in a good way, it can be a brake. It can slow the development.
I'm happy that you mentioned that. When I actually entered the debate on capital market, local capital market, that Warsaw Stock Exchange started, all of my colleagues were, well, reduce or get rid of the capital gain tax. And I was like, well, from our perspective, well, maybe we're not, turning to retail pockets as private equity. But then when looking at the video today, this is actually a brilliant marketing spot, a brilliant educational touch point that you can use, just sort of attracting the attention, right, of the people that could put the money into saving accounts.
Yes, and it is both like a marketing way of promoting investments, and also the so many times mentioned simplicity. In Sweden, the famous ISK is based on the flat tax rate. For me, the most important issue is that investors do not have to file tax return. You can imagine for a common people to file tax return, which is usually filed for them by their employer, but in case of investments, they would have to file their own tax return. This is pretty complicated, and most of us are not accountants or tax advisors. So the simplicity in taxation was one of the key success pillars of the Swedish system. And I must mention that we have also in Czech Republic one, I think, of the reasons why investments are now so popular. It is the taxation of investments. In practice, we have so-called 3 years time test, and it means that after 3 years holding period, you do not have to tax your capital gain, and you mainly do not have to file tax return. And this is a great relief for a number of people, that this type of taxation or the investment is not a burden for them. It's just simple. We did some research amongst investors. Was the most important issue for them with regards to investing, and actually taxation was not one of the main issues, but maybe because we have this 3-year time test, and they don't have to care about the taxation of investments. So maybe at the end, it's not that much about the level of taxation, but about the simplicity, whether it's the flat tax rate in Sweden or capital gains exemption in the Czech Republic.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have a holding period, which sort of, keeps those people and give them incentive to stay with the saving account, which is actually something that we are actually fighting for, right? So this is not, it's actually a long-term game.
Yes, it's because it's about long-termism. For me, when I look at investors, so let's say the worst ones are the ones that invest like one-stop shop. Here I have 4,000 euros, I invested, and then I watch it. Like, did it
That's
increase,
trading, not investing,
decrease,
right?
And in a small decrease, they start to panic. But if you are a long-term investor investing for long-term, and especially if you are investing periodically, like every month you are sending 20 euros, 40 euros, whatever amount, then it gets for you much easier to get accustomed to some decreases or increases in your investment value.
You're encouraged to put money, forget about it, and then you actually, have the returns when the time flies. Okay, we already heard about pan-European products. We heard about the 28th regime, which is very popular in all of the European debates right now. But what is this European idea and the push for this, having the blueprint in our savings, investment, our own product, and what are the obstacles to introduce that product, Max?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I'm going to agree with a lot of what Jana already said. We think the priority
That's
at
why
the
we
moment,
put her in the middle. So
very good. We think the priority should be on introducing these accounts and these incentives to get more people to invest in the member states. You mentioned Savings and Investments Union. Before we had SIU, we had the Capital Markets Union. And at New Financial, we've long argued that in the first 10 years of the Capital Markets Union in the EU, there was perhaps too much focus on the U, the Union, and not enough focus on the C and the M, the capital markets. Because we say you can't really focus on the Union bit, on harmonizing capital markets, when they are very small or practically do not exist in many EU member states. So we need to look at what the member states themselves can do to build capacity to build capital markets from the bottom up. And Jana already mentioned the PEP, which we think is the perfect example of how not to do it. After 7 years of debate between the member states, it launched in 2022, but saw virtually no take-up, with just 2 providers today offering PEPs in 5 different markets. And that's not what we want to see. And I don't think it's what the EU was hoping to see. And my worry is that if we now focused on introducing a pan-European savings and investment account, we would basically repeat the same exercise, would repeat the same mistakes. It would take years to negotiate, agree, implement an investment account between the 27 member states, only to then have an outcome that might not work. So we say,
absolutely.
do it in the member states first.
Yeah, exactly. It's taking the focus from the main things that European Union could do, right? If you add that, something that EU could do using that time, taking that discussion from the PEP.
But what we do think, and that is why having a blueprint from the European Commission will be so helpful, is that even though it should be introduced at the member state level, they should introduce these with some, guidelines or guardrails from the Commission, so that not every member state walks off in a completely different direction. And then once you have these accounts up and running, and you see that they are successful in many or even most member states, I think then we can think about, right, now that we've got these frameworks, is there a way we can bring them together at the European level? Could there be a form of interoperability that if I moved from, say, Germany to Poland, I could move my savings from the German account into the Polish account? There's an example between Australia and New Zealand, which is called the Trans-Tasman Retirement Savings Portability Scheme, where you can take your retirement savings when you move from Australia to New Zealand or vice versa, and move them from one system to another, even though the systems themselves are slightly different. And, we could, take inspiration from these examples, and also think about, might there be a way to make it easier for providers to offer these accounts in other member states if they already have an approved blueprint account in their home markets? So we say focus now on introducing these accounts in the member states to get the ball rolling, but still have that European ambition and vision, do it guided and coordinated by the Commission, with a view to looking at how maybe these can become a part of a wider pan-European framework in the future.
Lovely. I promised to save some time, but my panel is quite talkative, so I'm not. But it's brilliant. Thank you very much for a lot of examples. I promised Gosia that I'm not going to monopolize this debate with private markets, but that's the time, actually, to turn into the idea and the question of diversification. I got my media tracking today. I didn't dig into the article, but one of the headlines was "Barbarians No More. Private equity," and that sort of, gave me the energy to turn into the private markets a little bit. Robert, and that's actually a question to you. Allianz in Poland not invested in private equity yet, but another insurance did that twice, and I saw the representative of that particular TFI. So. But you're definitely looking at that asset class. What we should do, or what we as private equity, the regulator, the state, policymakers should do in order to help you to turn from just looking at that part of the market into actually investing?
Yeah, to be fair, private equity is not so much a topic for us here at TFI Allianz in Poland, but it's more a bigger topic for Allianz Group, so for the global Allianz, and therefore I indirectly know a little bit what our colleagues are doing. I think the big difference that we have, or status right now in Poland, is that there's not so much institutional money, in my opinion, or at least not enough, who would be investing and sponsoring basically private equity. So you have huge corporate pension schemes in the Western world, so in Germany, for example. You have much more money in terms of family offices and endowments. And these kind of institutional monies, which typically invest in private equity, you don't have them here in Poland yet. At least for the time being, in my opinion, it's not enough, and therefore that asset class has not really taken off in Poland yet to that extent. Of course, there are some activities, but it's not the same scale as we know it in Western Europe. And it is still, I don't want to say a new asset class, but for people in Poland, it is still somewhat new, and getting it established will take time, and it will have to be the right setup and the right investment landscape. Right now, looking at the forum, we're trying to convince people to move money from the bank deposits into the capital market, which in my thinking is the first logical step, and then later we can be thinking how to enrich the investment landscape, the investment offering with private markets, including private equities. And maybe I should add, for me, private equity is not the only part in private markets. There's much more to private markets: private lending, infrastructure, renewables, etc. So the non-liquid assets. And this is the last point. We have to remember private equity is not the same asset as equities or bonds, which are listed on the stock market. So the whole illiquidity is an additional aspect that needs to be taken into account when we talk about private equity. And again, I think there are bigger, more important topics in Poland, in the Polish capital market, than private equity.
Right. Well, we absolutely could agree that the time will come. Nevertheless, we're always too late with introducing things that has already been introduced somewhere else. And then we're discussing why we haven't done that and what we should do. But then I guess that the infrastructure should be ready for diversification. We had a good dinner discussion with the chair of ESMA, and she said that, well, we are for diversification. I mean, we should enrich the portfolios for investing, and actually to help savings and investment union. So I'm not going to make statements, but we are ready to take that money. Culture, education, that's actually a topic I don't like, but I think this is a very important topic. In the discussions of the transfer of money, we do have some time still. I'm going to be better than other moderators. But anyway, so the design of the product is not enough. Culture matters, and this is coming from the report that Maximilian was talking about. Based on international experience, your research, how do we shift, and what we should do to shift the public mindset towards and turn it towards investment? Maximilian.
Absolutely, culture does matter. You can have all the regulatory change you want. If people think investing isn't for them, if they don't understand it, if they find it too risky, they won't do it. I want to make 2 points. First is on sort of a public information campaign. There's a few examples of those campaigns that were very successful in driving this culture change. And they were actually more than just campaigns. They were about changing the mentality, the mindset, the way people think about investing in the capital markets. The US wasn't always a nation of investors. This was mainly driven by a big campaign by the New York Stock Exchange in the 1950s and 60s that called on Americans to own a share of American business. And, you know, the stock exchange went into high streets, they went into department stores, they went into shops, they went where the people are and talked to them and talked about, you know, investing, about having a stake in the economy. And Jana already mentioned Sweden. They did something similar. In the 1960s, 70s, 80s, arguably up to today, there was a broad political consensus that it is a good idea if workers own a share of the companies they work for. So in both cases, it wasn't so much about actually investing, it was having a stake in the economy that they focused on. And we saw something similar in the UK when many of the large utilities were privatized, and I believe in Czechia as well. And it feels like where we are in Europe at the moment, with sort of economic revival, with some of the challenges that we are facing, digital transition, green transition, maybe even defense and security, it feels like now would be a good moment to, call on Europeans to also have a stake in the European economy. And just very quickly, a second point, even though these campaigns are important, I don't think they are quite enough because they stay at the theoretical level. They still need people to actively do something. And I think we should help people to overcome their inertia and look at, how can we introduce some form of auto-enrollment mechanism. All of the large capital markets in Europe have auto-enrollment workplace pensions. Sweden, the UK, Denmark, the Netherlands. And that's about sort of going to people where they are and helping them make that step into investing very easy. So I think it's about making people aware through campaigns, but then it's also about making them an accessible offer to overcome their inertia.
Public trust to the discussion of culture of investment, Jana.
So I will maybe follow up on the campaigns, because I think that one of the most important campaigns is not to be done by the state, but it's the changing the mindset. And what I mean is that if my parents didn't invest, it was much more difficult for me to start investing. But now this is our opportunity to transfer this knowledge to our kids. And I think that this is a generational change, and I really hope that this will change in the upcoming years. But trust is a key for this change to happen. And what I mean by trust, because again, it's a buzzword, based on our research, one of the most important barriers for investors to invest, it was that they feared that it will be a fraud, and that they will come across some fraudulent investment provider. And I think they were not that wrong, because I think that one of the key issues that can be done is really the level playing field of regulation, where if it is investment, then there should be some basic rules. It is really difficult to explain to retail investors, look, so if you invest with this provider, then you have to go through the investment questionnaire, then he has to provide you with all the information. But if you invest via this platform, then it's not necessary. We have some examples of how some companies are avoiding the regulation. Should it be the so-called marketplace? Oh, we are not providing investments. We are just a marketplace where you can find some investments, or so-called participation. We are not in investments. This is just a participation in investments. Like, what's this? How retail investors can gain trust, but at one time, when they invest into some highly regulated products, such as investment funds, they have to go through all the procedures, get all the necessary information, provide all the necessary information, and then can buy in one-stop shop in several minutes this type of investment, which is, however, unregulated. So I mean, how to gain trust is to have a level playing field. Maybe step a bit back with regulation of the already regulated entities and bring into some basic rules for distribution of investment. And this is how I think the trust can be gained even throughout the generations.
Robert, the Polish saving accounts, IKX, do you think they could be changed based on what Jana said, to actually gain, first of all, scale, public trust, and that leads to simplicity and the interest of the retail investors?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I should say that products like IKX, but also very important for me is PPK, are, in my opinion, very good products. The success, it's improving. Looking at the products objectively, considering that they are good products, the success should be higher. So the question is, why is it not higher? And here maybe it's, again, we're coming back to words like the lack of understanding or education, financial literacy. Maybe it's trust, in particular when PPK was launched, and we heard lots of issues about people not trusting the new product, given the previous history. So I think if we're able to establish these products more and more, then maybe some of these aspects are not even that necessary, because the products by themselves are good. It's the problem with the awareness. But of course, if there are possibilities to improve, to do some fine-tuning, to have automation, that you don't have to worry about taxes at all, that you don't have related paperwork, etc., of course that would be good to introduce those things. But I think the overarching aspect is the trust aspect, that and then the knowledge, the awareness that yes, this is a good product, and I should be investing because it's good for me.
Thank you. I think a lot has been said. You know, I feel more educated. But what I have taken from that discussion is that, well, pan-European accounts are sort of this try of having one size fits all. That is not working. Everybody in every country, every policymakers in every member state have to look at their playground and do what's necessary to reach the common goal, but to use very, very simple ways to introduce, or simple tools in order to attract that. Not limit, and I can add that from myself, not to limit to very narrow sectors, think about diversification, because Max just proved my point that we're always too late with everything. Of course, look at taxation and simplicity of taxation, actually, not, and that was actually one of the things that surprised me, that this is not no taxation at all, but simple taxation, and all of the materials, regulations, forms that you have to fill in around that. But I think all of us can agree that this is trillion euros opportunity that lies there, that all of you can use with some help, of course, policymakers and think tanks, education providers. So I think we should end this panel with just a simple say, let's act on this trillion euros opportunity. And I hope that you agree, and I hope we'll work further to do that. Thank you very much. And if there is a prize for the moderator, I'm taking it. I saved almost 4 minutes. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Jana, Robert, Max, thank you very much for accepting the invitation. And let's continue the discussions in the coffee room and online, Max. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.